Hi, in this video I will be giving my take on the Canon NFD 50mm F1.8. In putting together some of the visuals for this video, I took the lens out to a number of locations over the last month. I'm out here in the Breede River Valley area outside Worcester in the Western Cape in South Africa. So I'm out here on the Cecilia Forest Trail on Table Mountain. I'm out here at the beach in Cape Town.
I also spent some time at Sea Point Promenade. I also spent some time in Franschhoek in the Winelands.
I've done a review of my FD 50mm which has the breech lock, the older version, so be sure to check that video out. I'll link it down below. Now please bear in mind that my copy of this lens is itself 42 years old this year, so I'm putting my normal disclaimer out there that a vintage lens can only be held accountable for its performance as much as its condition really allows. How do I know how old this lens is? Well, I know it's 42 years old because if you take a look at on the back, you'll notice a serial stamp, and in this case it's V1012. Now this tells me that this lens was manufactured in 1981, the month of October. I will link a video below where I explain how to determine the date of manufacture of your Canon FD lens. NFD lenses were indeed manufactured in Japan. It has a focal length of 50mm, which is considered the standard focal length for 35mm film format or for full-frame mirrorless cameras or DSLRs. It has an aperture range from a maximum of f1.8, which is quite fast, stretching all the way to f22. The 50mm FD lens is prior to the NFD. This range was introduced in 1978. Now the ones prior to this, they had a minimum aperture of f16. The aperture ring itself is clicked in half-stop increments. The closest focusing distance is 60 centimeters, which is, it's not close and it's far from a macro lens, but it's useful enough. It has a filter diameter of 52 millimeters, which is a fairly standard size that makes it easy to find filters and filter accessories to fit on the front of the lens. The lens weighs only 170 grams, which is great if you're used to carrying around a heavy, modern, large aperture autofocus lens, and especially if you build up video rigs and you wish to cut down some weight. It's one way to do that is actually use one of these lenses. It is 35 millimeters long and has a diameter of 63 millimeters, so it's quite small, even if it wasn't evident enough from the video so far. To the chagrin of the bokeh ball police, this lens only has 5 aperture blades, giving the rise to bokeh balls that are not perfectly round. The lens coating, interestingly enough, is not super spectra coated like the rest of the NFD range. It's only spectra coated. The rest of the NFD range has the superior SEC coating. This one, maybe for cost considerations, was given only the SC version, which doesn't reduce flare as much as the SSC. Now, on a vintage lens, maybe you like flare and maybe this is something that you actually prefer. The lens is a mix of metal and plastic parts, making it quite a bit lighter than the older FD and FL lenses. Some may say it feels cheaper, but to me it just makes it lighter, and that is a good thing. And I have not found an NFD lens yet where the plastics were corroded or even broken. It has a 160-degree focus throw with that usual smooth resistance that the FD lenses generally feature. But 160 degrees is still a fairly long way to turn a lens with your hand when focusing from 60 centimeters to infinity. And it's difficult to do in one turn. So for video, I would advise you to probably use a follow focus system. Lastly, the NFT lenses feature the FD mount, but not the breech lock of the earlier FD models. You know, that lock at the back sometimes was chrome. And this release button makes it much easier to attach and remove from a camera body. The price, it's cheap. A quick search on eBay suggests $25 to $60 is a going rate of sorts. Technical specs can be discussed ad infinitum, but to me a lens really only has the value in how it works and what results it yields. As much as I like looking at it, I prefer looking through it. Now, when using this lens, I make use of the K&F Concepts FD EOS R lens mount converter. All stills were shot in RAW, and I used the Adobe Color Space, and footage I was shot on C-Log on my Canon R6. Wide open, the lens is sharp in the middle, with sharpness falling off considerably to the edges, but it sharpens up radically once you stop the lens down, where at around f11 the lens is actually remarkably sharp. The lens's sharpness, or lack thereof in some instances, gives it that very cool dreamy look, and I really find that appealing. The lens shows considerable vignetting, again wide open, which I personally love. I actually love adding it in post. Now the vignetting subside as you stop down towards f22. The lens shows bluish fringes on highlight areas. It's prevalent at f1.8. It's less so at the smaller apertures. Chromatic aberrations seem to be fairly minimal, where one can possibly point at the spectral coating, which even in this earlier iteration was already quite effective against chromatic aberration. Now when it comes to flare, one finds blue flares if you shoot again wide open into, for instance, the sun, and it spreads across the frame in some instances, and that again can point to the less effective flare reduction of the spectral coating on this lens. I personally love the dreamy look the flare gives and the haze, and I took pains to shoot into the sun on a number of occasions to invite more flare and haze and see if that adds drama to the images, which I think it did. Color-wise, and this is always very subjective outside of a controlled laboratory environment, but the lens in broad terms seems consistent with the saturation and punchiness of the Canon NFT range. More or less neutral, but I find maybe a little bit of cyan creeping in there here and there. But this might very well again have to do with the circumstances in which I was shooting. Against light sources, if you're shooting with backlight, it loses a lot of contrast, and one can reasonably expect that. But when shooting a well-lit subject with front lighting, the lens shows very good saturation and contrast. I can't pick up any lens distortion offhand, and would rather not comment on lens distortion of a 50mm because it's quite minimal most of the time, and it seems to reproduce faithfully to what a normal 15mm lens would. Now, as for bokeh, in some instances the bokeh details and balls have sharp edges, which I suppose it depends on who you are. I don't always mind it depending on what is in the background, but I know some people just have an issue with hard lines in the background. Ultimately, to me, the focus is not the background. The most important bits of an image are in fact the bits in the front, or in most cases, and the bits that are in focus. Therefore, sharpness to me is more important than the bokeh in the background. The lens handles easy. I use it even on my Canon AE1 film camera, and naturally it feels right at home there. Now, my take, I've reviewed a couple of FD lenses, and as part of a FD kit, especially for video, I would recommend the f1.8. Especially if that 1.4 or the 1.2 is out of your budget. Bar the extra stop of light you get with the 1.4, I think you'll get more or less the same amount of joy with this lens. Thanks again for watching this video, and please consider liking and subscribing. I will link some videos below that I mentioned in this video, and also we'll put some links to gear I used here and some FD lenses that I found online. Naturally, it's affiliate links, and I will receive some commission at no cost to you if you should buy it. I hope you have a fantastic day and maybe consider watching one of these other videos.